Hey guys, what's going on? Matt here, and welcome back to the Black Ops 3 Mod Tools scripting tutorial series. So then, in this video, we're going to be putting a fan into the map, which we'll be able to control. So we'll be able to stop it, we'll be able to start it, and that's basically the example for this video. So the reason why we're doing this is it's basically a really good example to show loops, otherwise known as iteration. And this is quite literally being able to loop around the same code as many times as you want. You can control different aspects, of course, but it's basically going to allow us to continuously press the same trigger, but to toggle it. So to toggle the fan on and off, depending on the state. But of course, continuously do that. So this, this sort of looping and iteration will be quite an important part in a lot of the more upcoming sort of tutorials. It's something that is used very, very frequently. You can do them in different ways, but we'll kind of get to that once we get to it. So to begin with, I've gone ahead and opened up the map GSC just ahead of time. And I've also opened up Radiant. All I've done is put in a control panel, just so we know where the trigger is going to be. And I've gone ahead and put in 2 models for the fan. Nothing has been done other than just placing models here. So we do need to do, all the KVPs, setting things to script models, everything still needs to be done. So let's get started by, setting up the Radiant side of it. So it's going to be where you go up to this control panel, you're going to press your activate button, and it's going to basically start or stop this fan from spinning. So let's go ahead and drag in a trigger use. I've got it all pre-selected here just because, we've done this quite a few times at this point. Let's go ahead and just drag and drop this in like so. There we go. We're going to give it a target name. Actually, let's update the cursor hint first so we don't have the icon. We're going to give it a target name, let's say fan trigger. There we go. Next step, of course, is to actually have this fan interactable. So we need to be converting this over to a script model. I really spelled that wrong, didn't I? Yeah. Over to a script model. There we go. And now we're going to link the trigger to the model, or link the model to the trigger. I'm not too sure which makes the most sense there. The trigger to the model. Okay, so we now have access to the trigger. That's excellent, and we can now also have access now to the model as well, using the sort of auto one. So I press the trigger and the model. Trigger and the model, press W, and it sort of automatically links them two together. So that's what we need to do is, of course, set up the actual script. Radiant, for the most part, is done now, I think, so we can just go ahead and save that, actually. We'll keep it open just for reference, though. Next, let's go down to user map main. You will notice, by the way, these tutorials do gradually get a little bit quicker. I'm not going to be moving any quicker than this, because this is just the speed at which I would normally work at. But because we've kind of covered the basics, we've done this quite a few times at this point. I'm not going to be spending loads of time going over the same stuff. I don't want you guys to get bored. So if any of this is a bit unfamiliar, please do go back and have a look at them where I sort of go over things in quite a lot of detail. But at this point, a lot of things should hopefully be quite familiar. And of course, if not, please do let me know. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a new function thread. So we'll go ahead and do level thread. Do fan. We'll just call it fan. That's simple enough. We'll go ahead and do function fan like so. Just put a point in there just to have something in there. I tend to do that just, I don't know why, I always just put a comment in there with no actual text, just something I've got a habit of doing. Okay, so next what we need to do is actually go and grab the trigger. So we're going to do get ent, just as we've done quite a few times, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the target name as fan trigger. Could have probably remembered that if I actually made a note of what I called that. Going to go ahead and do target name in the second one. There we go. So next we're going to require the player to look at it. think it makes the most sense. I appreciate we're doing this for pretty much every trigger at this point, every use trigger. You don't have to, it's just, I have a bit of a preference. I like the player to actually look at the trigger when they're doing something, but you don't have to do it in the slightest. Now let's set the hint string. We'll do it to, I guess, press, and then 1, 2, spin fan. So to begin with, the fan will not be spinning. That's, kind of what I want here. And then when you sort of press the button, it will start spinning, and of course you can press it again to turn it off, and keep doing that to keep turning it on and off, to keep making it spin and stop. So next, what we need to do is actually go and grab the fan itself. So before we get into any logic, let's go and grab what we need. So we'll go ahead and do fan equals get ent. Of course, we've already set it up for the trig, so we can just do trig.target. Target name. Excellent. There we go. Now the next bit now is where obviously the actual logic is going to start starting. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to be using a global variable for this. So at the moment, we've been using variables like these, where we've sort of got the trigger set up and we've got the fan set up. The problem with these is you can only use them in the same function unless you pass them as a parameter. So unless you had a function, you pass it like we're doing here, you simply can't use them. So the way we can kind of get around this is we can use level dot, and I'm just going to type it out and then explain it. We'll call it fan should spin, I guess. Okay, so what this allows us to do is we can now use this. It's treated in the same way as any of these two, but this now is used throughout the level. So we can call this in other functions, we can call it in other scripts, but we have a lot more control over it. And what this allows us to do is basically keep things a little bit neater. You don't want to overuse them because it can also look quite messy. But if you use them quite, I guess, in relevant sort of situations, it can make things a lot easier to read as well. So we're going to go ahead and do level.fan should spin, and this is simply just how we're going to be controlling whether it literally should be spinning or not spinning. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to, just set it to false. So it's going to be a Boolean value, so that means it can be true or it can be false. And this is how we go to control it, as I say. So we'll be able to access the value of this. Of course, the default is false. We'll be able to access this now, though, throughout the script. We won't just be limited to this one function, and you'll see why later, because I am going to have to use two separate functions for this. So the next bit is to actually set up the loop itself. Now, I did mention at the start of this video kind of what a loop is, but it really is exactly as the name suggests. You're just looping around. So if I just do while, I'm going to use a while loop in this. Now there's a few different types. You got a while, at least just off the top of my head. You've got a while loop, you've got a for loop, and you've got a for each. Now they're all used in slightly different situations. A while loop is typically used for what I'm doing right here, which obviously we'll see in a moment. For loops are normally for when you're sort of going around like an index. So maybe you've got a group of 5 things, but you want to sort of loop between each one of them, but in like an order, but also keep, like which one you're at. So maybe when you're on like the third one of a group of 5, you still want to know that you're on the third one. So it's quite useful to know kind of where you're at in that loop. And a for each is pretty much the same as a for, but you don't necessarily need to know where you are in that loop. It basically just says, here's the group of things, just go through each one of them for me. That's really it. So, they've all got a little bit of differences, but for the most part, they all just go around effectively in a circle, if you will. So the reason why we're using a while loop here is whatever we pass into these two brackets is going to control if we are still going around or if we need to stop. So each time we go around and we get to the end, it's pretty much just going to take a look at this and be like, do we need to keep going or do we want to stop here? Now in this case, we want to continuously go because we want this trigger to always be active. Now, if you don't want the trigger to always be active, then you can change the logic here. I will show how to, kind of how we want to control that later on. But that is kind of where the condition is. We've put a 1 in here just because as long as this condition is true, like you could literally do 1 equals 1. 1 does equal 1, so it is true. We just use 1 because 1 is true. For example, we've got the fan should spin equals false. False is pretty much equivalent to a 0. Without going too in depth with Boolean, they're not exactly the same, but for the purposes of this, a 1 is true and a 0 is false for the most part. Without going super mental. So what we can do in here is, because we're going to be going around this while loop continuously, we can put at the very start of it trig wait till. So what this is going to do is it's going to continuously go around this loop, but it's going to get held at the very start each time until that trigger's been pressed, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to just continuously go around, because we want to wait until the player has actually done something. In this case, it's going to be activating that trigger. So each time you activate the trigger, the loop, the code within this loop will actually get run. And then once it's been run, it will go back to waiting for the next press, which in this case is exactly what we want. So as soon as the trigger's been pressed, we now want to invert this value. So, if we're going up to the trigger and it's currently spinning, so, fan should spin in that case will be true. We now want to set it to false and stop it from spinning, okay? Now, what we could do is we could do level.fan should spin equals true. We absolutely could do that. But the problem with doing this is the second time you go ahead and press the, activate the trigger, it's going to set it to true again when it's already true. We don't want to set it to true unless it's false. And we don't want to set it to false unless it's true. So what we're really doing, all we're doing really is inverting the last value. And a really nice way we can do this, we can just use the exclamation mark, which is basically inverting it. It's basically doing the inverse of whatever comes after it. So if we do exclamation mark level.fan should spin, that is literally going to set fan should spin to the opposite to what it was previously. That is all that's doing, which in this case is really nice because it's exactly what we need. So now we have fan should spin updated, we now actually need to action this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an if statement. And now all an if statement is kind of as it suggests, it's going to check if a condition is true. So you would do if level.fan should spin. I'm just going to type it out to begin with. There we go. So it's going to say if the condition in between these two brackets is true, do the code inside of here. Okay. And in this case, if fan should spin, we want spin the fan. Okay. Of course, we will, I will replace these comments with actual code fairly shortly, but just to kind of get the logic right, we'll just sort of lay it out like this. So if level.fan should spin, spin the fan. Now what happens when we don't want to spin the fan? If we didn't have anything else, these scripts would just go to the end and it would start until the next trigger gets pressed. It wouldn't actually do anything when we're turning it off. Instead, what we're going to do is just use an else. And what an else does is, again, kind of as the name really suggests, so we're going to check if this is true, else we're going to do this. So we're going to spin the fan if fan should spin is true. Otherwise, do this. In this case, it would be stop the fan. Okay, so what we can do now is, just so we can kind of keep a bit of like a mental check on this, I'm going to just update the hint string now for each time. So when you press the trigger, if the fan should spin, we now need to update the hint string to stop the fan. Now it might sound like this is the opposite to what you'd want to do, but at the point in which the player presses that trigger and the fan should be spinning, the next thing that player would want to see is how to stop it. So it's actually what they want to see after that press. So in this case, we're about to spin it. Well, we're about to, spin the fan. We now want the next action to suggest, do you want to stop it? So we're going to update the hint string in here to like the stop variant, I guess, of it. So trigger set hint string to press and 1 to stop fan. Okay. And of course, on the other side, we want to be doing the opposite to it. So the fan's about to stop, but now the next action would be to start it. So we can do the inverse there. So each time we'll be basically toggling between these two strings. I should note, by the way, a string is just text. If I do happen to sort of use that word without sort of explaining it, a string is just text for the most part. So we've got that working. Of course, we don't actually have any logic in place to actually spin the fan, and we will get to that in a moment. But one thing I wanted to note here is within a loop, you kind of want to be conscious of the speed at which this can run. So loops do run very quickly. In fact, if you were to just have some text outputting to the screen in a loop, you would really be quickly spammed with like on-screen text. So just to kind of slow the loop down, not slow it down so it's too slow, but just so it doesn't go absolutely mental. The game will actually have an issue if you have a loop that sort of literally loops with absolutely no weight between each sort of, I guess, pass. The game will have an issue with that. In this case, it's not a big. In this case, it's not a problem at all because we're waiting for the trigger. But if you did not have this and you was continuously going around in a circle, what you do need to do is just put a weight in here. Now I'm going to do it for this just because I think it's good to see. I think it's useful just to have in this example anyway. But if you didn't have this weight till, you want to just wait for a little bit of time. Now, the lowest value you can have here is 0.05. I'm going to do 0.1 because what this is going to do is each time the trigger's been pressed, it's going to wait for 1/10 of a second before it's going to acknowledge any other button press. Now, what this is really good for is, of course, if you accidentally press the button twice, it kind of, in 1/10 of a second, you probably can press it twice, but in general, it's good so you don't have like a double press, maybe something like that. In this case, it literally is just to put that small delay in. Normally, though, it would, as I say, just be to stop a loop, sort of running like insanely quick, which, as I say, has a few issues. So make sure if you do not have something like this, at the very start or somewhere within your loop, make sure you do be putting a weight in here. And as I say, put it to 0.05 if you want there to be like no noticeable delay whatsoever. So with that kind of out of the way, I kind of felt like it was probably quite important to touch on now. The next bit what we need to do is actually do the spinning of the fan. Now what we can do for this is we can actually use the fan in context. So to do this, we're going to just go make a new function called spin fan, I guess. Now, what we can do is we can actually control this in the context of the fan. So we don't have to set fan to like level.fan or anything like that. There's no need to be doing that. We can do it within the context of a fan, or in the context of this variable, I should say. So what we can do in here, we can do fan thread. Remember, we need to do thread because we don't want the script to stop. We want it to continue running. Like at the same time, so we need to thread it, and then we can do spin fan. Now what this is going to do is it's going to run this function each time we press the trigger, providing the fan should spin. It's going to run this function. Okay, now don't worry, we won't be running this function continuously all the time. I have thought about that, but it's going to run this every single time. Okay. So in here, we can now refer to the fan as self, okay? Now self is quite literally the thing that has been threaded onto it, okay? So from now on, we now know the fan as self. So what we can do is we can do another while loop in here. But in this case, we don't want it to run continuously. We only want, I guess, a bit of a future note here. Within this loop, this is where we're actually going to be rotating the fan. Okay, but we only want it to be rotating providing the fan should be spinning. Okay, so in here we can do level dot fan should spin, and then in here we can actually spin it. So what this is going to do is it's going to say, right, spin the fan. Awesome. It's going to go into here. It will, in a few moments, it will start to spin the fan. And as soon as we stop that spinning, fan should spin goes to false, which means this condition here is no longer true, in which case it's going to continue down here and this function will end, which is the reason why this will not get run over and over again. As soon as the fan should not spin, this function is going to reach the end. This loop will stop, it's going to reach the end of this function and it will be no longer. And then as soon as we want to spin the fan again, it's going to basically start it again. So it's going to be pretty much a loop within a loop. It's probably the best way to think about that. So within here, we actually need to spin the fan. And as I said, we can refer to it as self. And what we're going to do now is literally rotate it. Now, we've already done some move. So we've moved a drawer in a desk at this point. What we can now use, we can use the rotate functions. Now we have rotate pitch, we have rotate roll, and we have rotate yaw. Now I can never remember which one's which of these. I will put them. In fact, I've actually got a function thinking about it, which would help me. I'm terrible at remembering which one's which of these. Let me go and open up this just to remind myself. Rotating entities, there we go. So this is just a script which I've set up, for various other projects and whatnot. So if you're rotating, I'll just kind of read this to you guys, I guess. So if you're rotating on the X axis, you want to be using rotate roll. And if you're rotating on the Y axis, you want to use pitch. And if it's on the Z axis, you want to be using yaw. Okay. So roll for X, pitch for Y, and yaw for Z. Okay. That's I guess, a bit of an overview on which one you're going to be using. I can never remember, and that's the reason why I made that to begin with. So in this case, we're going to be rotating on, I should have really kept it open, on the Y axis. That's this one here. So just reopen that and remind myself. So Y is pitch. Excellent. So rotate pitch. The next two bits is very similar to the move function. So it's, how much you want to do it by and then the time. In this case, it's how many degrees you want to rotate it by. We're going to do a full rotation, so 360 degrees. And we're going to do this in, let's do 0.5 seconds. We want it to be fairly fast. So 0.5 seconds, and then we're just going to do a wait just to make sure that this actually completes before we move on to do anything else. So that is as simple as that is. So this entire script is going to wait for the input. It's going to invert the previous state, which, will sort of make that toggle between stop and spin. We're going to, providing it should be spinning, we're going to set up this. We're going to make it start spinning. As soon as we want it to stop spinning, this function is going to come out of the while loop. It's going to finish the function, and the hint string will, of course, update to pressing the button to stop the fan. And of course, if we press it again and we want to spin the fan, that's exactly what will happen. In this case, we don't actually need to do anything in here because we're already inverting it, and because we've got this check over here, we don't need to sort of run any additional function in here. It's all taken care of via this, I guess, more global variable. So that is that. I'm going to go ahead and just save this, and then I'm going to go and do make sure I save this as well. And then I'm going to open up this. I'm going to go ahead and do a full compile. And then I'll show you guys over in game, providing everything works, this working. And of course, if there is any issue, we'll jump back into the code and see what the issue is. But hopefully, it will work first time. So I'll see you guys over in game in a few moments. Okay, so over in game, let's go ahead. You can see the fan is not spinning. We can press F to spin the fan. It's going to start spinning. It's awesome. We can press F to stop the fan. It's going to stop. Spin, and we can stop. We can keep doing that as many times as we want. There's a slight delay in between each input, so you can't just spam it continuously. Right, try not to die here. But yeah, as you can see, we can keep doing that as many times as we want, and you can do some pretty cool stuff with doing this sort of thing. In this case, it was just a fan. You could even do maybe some lights, something like that, or maybe like an Easter egg step. Who knows? But yeah, that's been a bit of an intro. It's been used, using while loops quite a fair bit there, which is really going to be quite a big building block for some of the next scripts that will be constructing as well. So hopefully this has helped. Of course, any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to help you guys there. But other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.